The wind had been howling since dusk, pushing dust and rain against the small wooden house like it wanted in. Inside, the young father moved quietly, making sure his son's blanket stayed tucked beneath the boy's chin. The child's breathing had already softened into sleep, unbothered by the storm outside. But the father, Ethan, wasn't as easily at peace. Nights like this always reminded him how alone the house felt when the world went dark. He sat near the dying fire, mending a torn saddle strap, when a faint sound broke through the wind, a knock. At first, he thought he imagined it, some echo of the storm against the shutters. Then it came again, clearer this time. 3 knocks. Uneven. Weak. He stood slowly, one hand resting on the rifle by the door. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer, just the hiss of rain. When he opened the door, the lamplight spilled into the storm, catching the figure of a woman, soaked to the bone, shivering, her dark hair plastered to her face. She stood motionless for a moment, as if unsure whether to speak or flee. A faded blanket clung to her shoulders, and through it, he could see the curve of old beadwork, a patchy make. Her eyes, deep and wary, searched his face for something, mercy, perhaps. Ethan hesitated. Out here, strangers could mean trouble. But the sight of her trembling hands, and the way she bit her lip, as though swallowing fear, silenced the part of him that wanted to shut the door. "Please," she said softly, voice rough from cold. "Just, one night. I'll be gone by morning." He studied her for a heartbeat longer. She wasn't begging. She was asking, with dignity, even in desperation. Something about that quiet strength stirred something old and familiar in him, the part that once believed in kindness before the world hardened him. He nodded once. "Come in." As she stepped inside, a gust of cold air followed, carrying the scent of wet earth and sage. She stood near the door, not daring to move closer until he motioned her toward the fire. He handed her a towel and turned away, giving her the space to dry herself. When she thanked him, her voice cracked, and he heard the exhaustion buried inside it, not just from the storm, but from running, maybe from life itself. His boy stirred in the next room, and for a moment, the woman's gaze softened as she glanced toward the sound. There was something motherly, or perhaps mournful, in her expression. Ethan saw it and said quietly, "He sleeps light. Don't worry, he'll stay out." She gave a small nod and drew closer to the fire, her face glowing in its warmth. For the first time, he saw her clearly, proud features marked by hardship, but not bitterness. Outside, the storm still raged. Inside, something else began, not love yet, but the faint, dangerous beginning of trust. The storm softened into a steady rain, drumming gently on the roof like the heartbeat of the land itself. Inside, the little house glowed with lamplight and the scent of wood smoke. Ethan set a pot of stew near the fire, the rich aroma of beans and venison filling the room. He hadn't planned to cook for 2, not since his wife passed 3 winters ago, but somehow, the act of preparing food for someone else steadied him. The woman sat near the hearth, still wrapped in his old wool blanket. Her damp hair had begun to dry, curling slightly around her cheeks. The flickering firelight painted her face in gold and shadow, a face both beautiful and worn, like something carved from memory. She didn't speak, only watched the flames as though they were a language she still remembered. When he brought her a bowl, she hesitated before accepting it. "You don't have to share," she said quietly. "I can work for it." Ethan shook his head. "Ain't payment I'm after. Just manners." For a moment, their eyes met, his calm, hers cautious, and then she nodded, taking the bowl with both hands. She ate slowly, almost reverently, as though unused to eating without hurry or fear. He could tell from the way she held the spoon that it had been a long time since someone had treated her as a guest. The boy stirred in the next room, murmuring in his sleep. Her gaze drifted toward the small bedroom door. "Your son?" He nodded. "Sam. 6 years old. Got more questions than I got answers for." Her lips twitched into something almost like a smile. He's lucky to have you. Ethan looked away, pretending to poke the fire, but the words cut deeper than she knew. Luck's a word I don't use much these days. For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. The rain outside softened further, and the sound of the fire grew louder, a warm, steady rhythm. He noticed the faint scars on her wrists as she reached for the ladle. Not fresh, but deliberate. The kind of marks that told stories men never should have written on women's skin. He didn't ask. Something about her made him feel that asking would break the fragile trust she'd given him. Instead, he poured himself another bowl and sat opposite her, cross-legged on the floor like two travelers who'd met by chance at a fire neither of them owned. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low. You shouldn't have opened that door. I could be anyone. He smiled faintly. You could. But you didn't lie about needing help. She looked into the flames, her eyes reflecting the fire. Kindness like that, it gets people hurt. Maybe, he said softly. But not helping hurts worse. The silence that followed was no longer heavy, it was full, like the air after rain. She turned her face slightly toward him, as if to memorize the shape of his words. And for the first time that night, he realized that whatever she was running from, it wasn't just men. It was the memory of being seen. The fire had burned low, leaving only the faint red glow of coals and the whisper of rain easing into silence outside. The small house felt still, so still that Ethan could hear the ticking of the old clock and the slow, rhythmic breath of his sleeping son in the next room. Across from him, the woman sat on the floor, knees drawn close, her eyes tracing the dying embers as though they carried messages from long ago. He'd offered her the bed earlier, but she refused with a quiet shake of the head. I've slept under worse skies, she had said. So he gave her the space she needed, but now, hours later, neither of them seemed able to sleep. Ethan poured what was left of the coffee into 2 tin cups and set one gently near her. She didn't look up at first, only reached for it with careful fingers. Her wrists, delicate yet scarred, caught the faint light, and again he felt that ache of wanting to know, not from curiosity, but from care. You from the mountains? He asked softly. Your blanket looks Apache. Her gaze flicked to him, cautious but not angry. It was my husband's, she said finally. Her voice carried the weight of something rehearsed, words she'd said before, maybe to strangers who hadn't really listened. He was a good man. Until they came. Ethan waited. She stared into the fire, her jaw tightening. They took our land, our horses, then our names. My husband tried to fight. They called him a savage. They shot him while he was praying. Ethan didn't move. The house was quiet except for the sound of the wind outside and the low creak of wood settling. I ran, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. At first because I was afraid. Then because I had no one left to bury him beside. She paused, breathing out slowly, as if each word cost her strength. They said I should serve their house, clean, cook, be grateful. I did, for a while. Until, her voice broke off, and her eyes glistened. Ethan's instinct was to reach for her hand, but he stopped himself halfway, the motion alone enough to make her glance at him. She didn't pull away this time when his fingers brushed hers, a simple, human touch that carried no promise but much understanding. Don't say more, he murmured. You don't have to. She looked at him, and something fragile passed between them, not pity, not desire, but recognition. Two souls who had both lost too much, learning again how to speak without fear. The fire popped softly, sending a brief flare of light that caught her eyes. You're kind, she said quietly. But kindness can get a man killed out here. Ethan smiled faintly, a shadow of humor beneath the weight of her truth. Maybe so. But I reckon it's worth dying for once in a while. She exhaled, a sound between a sigh and a tremor. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, two people sat in silence, strangers no longer, yet still afraid of what knowing each other might mean when morning came. Dawn came slow and gray, the kind of morning that carried silence like a secret. The rain had passed, leaving behind a damp calm that soaked the air and darkened the earth. Ethan stepped outside to fetch water from the well, the chill biting against his skin. Steam rose from the ground where the early sun touched it. For a while, everything felt peaceful, until he saw them. Boot prints. Fresh ones. Deep in the mud, leading up from the road and stopping short near the barn. Ethan crouched beside them, his breath tightening. There were at least 2 sets, heavy boots, made for riding. Not from town, not from anyone he knew. He followed them a few paces before they veered away again, toward the hills. Whoever they were, they'd come close enough to look, and then turned back. He stood still for a long moment, the morning quiet pressing against his chest. Then he looked toward the house. Through the small window, he could see her, the Apache widow, moving slowly, gathering her few things. The blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, her dark hair loose now, falling like a curtain down her back. When he walked inside, his boots left prints on the floorboards. She turned at the sound, reading his face before he even spoke. "Someone's been here," he said simply. Her expression changed, fear first, then resolve. "How far?" "Close enough to see the barn." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she sank down beside the table, her hand gripping the edge like it was the only solid thing left. "They've been tracking me for days," she whispered. "I thought the storm would hide my trail." Ethan's voice was low, calm. "Who are they?" Her jaw clenched. "Men from the fort. Soldiers, or worse. I don't know anymore." She looked up at him, her eyes hardening. "If they find me here, they'll take me back. And they won't ask what I did. They'll just decide I deserve it." He studied her, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her breath shook but didn't break. This wasn't a woman running from guilt. This was someone running from men who thought they had the right to own her. He moved toward the window, pushing the curtain aside. The land stretched wide and open, the kind of freedom that wasn't safe anymore. "You can stay in the barn," he said. "No one'll find you there unless they're looking hard." She looked up sharply. "You shouldn't help me. You've got a boy." He turned to face her, eyes steady. "I've also got a conscience." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she rose slowly, stepping closer. The distance between them was small, but filled with unspoken meaning, gratitude, fear, and something softer that neither dared name. Her voice trembled when she said, "You don't even know who I am." Ethan's reply was simple. "Don't need to. I know what it means to be hunted by something you didn't deserve." Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the grass. The danger had drawn closer, but so had their bond, the fragile, stubborn trust between a man who'd lost everything and a woman who no longer believed she could be saved. Night fell like a slow breath over the plains, heavy and watchful. The wind had died, and the world outside the barn seemed to hold its silence on purpose, as if listening. Ethan had moved his son into the hayloft earlier, wrapping him in a blanket and whispering that they were just camping close to the horses tonight. The boy had smiled sleepily, trusting his father's calm voice, unaware of the fear sitting between each heartbeat. The widow, her name still unspoken, sat in the shadows, her back against a stack of hay bales. The lantern light painted soft gold across her skin, outlining the curve of her cheek, the faint mark along her temple. She had been quiet for most of the evening, her gaze fixed on the barn doors as though expecting them to burst open at any second. Ethan checked the rifle, though he prayed he wouldn't have to use it. Then he sat down a few feet away from her. "They won't come tonight," he said softly. "Too dark to track in this light." She didn't look at him. "They don't need to see. They just follow orders." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. "So did I once," he murmured. "Didn't end well." Her eyes flickered toward him at that, curiosity breaking through her fear. You were a soldier. Scout. Years ago. He leaned back against the wooden beam, the creak of the boards soft in the quiet. Learned quick that orders and justice don't always walk the same road. Silence again, but gentler now. The horses shifted in their stalls, hooves rustling the straw. From above, his son murmured something in a dream. She glanced up toward the boy, and a faint tenderness crossed her face, fleeting, but real. He dreams easy, she said quietly. That's a gift. Ethan smiled faintly. He got that from his mother. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then she asked, softly, she's gone. He nodded once. 3 years now. Fever took her quick. The woman looked away, her voice a whisper. I'm sorry. He studied her, the way she hugged her knees close, the way her eyes glimmered in the dim light. You've got someone waiting for you, he asked. Her silence answered before she did. No one left. Not anymore. The barn creaked, and somewhere far off, a coyote called. Ethan stood, draped his coat around her shoulders, then sat again, closer this time. You don't have to keep watch alone, he said. For the first time that night, she looked at him, really looked. The hardness in her eyes softened, replaced by something wary but warm. She didn't thank him with words, instead, she let her hand rest lightly on his sleeve. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but in that still night, it carried the weight of trust. Outside, distant hoofbeats echoed faintly, then faded again into the darkness. They both heard it, and both stayed silent. The boy slept, the fire dimmed, and the two of them waited, hearts alert, breaths slow, suspended in that fragile space between danger and the quiet comfort of being seen. The first light of dawn spilled gently through the gaps in the barn wall, turning the air to soft gold. The storm had passed days ago, but the quiet that followed felt heavier somehow, like the world was waiting for something unspoken. Ethan woke before his son, as he always did, but the widow was already standing near the door, her figure framed by the early morning mist. She looked different in the sunlight, calmer, but with a weight in her shoulders that no sleep could ease. When she noticed him watching, she turned slightly, her eyes tired yet steady. You should wake your boy soon, she said. It's time I moved on. Ethan stood slowly, brushing hay from his hands. You don't have to, he replied. They might still be out there. Her lips curved into the faintest, sad smile. That's why I can't stay. I won't bring danger to your door. He took a few steps closer, careful, as though one wrong move might make her vanish. You saved my son's sleep these past nights. That's worth something. You don't owe me fear. She shook her head. You don't understand. Her voice trembled, though she tried to hold it steady. If they find me here, they'll burn what's left of this place, and they won't ask if you helped me. They'll just punish you for it. Her words made sense, but the thought of her leaving left a hollow ache in his chest. Tell me the truth, then, he said quietly. If you're going, I deserve to know what you're running from. She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the blanket draped over her shoulders, the same one she'd arrived in. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, with a long, shuddering breath, she spoke. I killed him. The words hung in the air, fragile and sharp. Ethan didn't move, didn't even blink. She went on, her voice low and flat, as if the telling hurt less if she stripped it of emotion. The man who owned the house I worked in, the one who called me a servant. He wasn't content with that. One night he came for more. I told him no. He didn't listen. Her gaze drifted to the floor, her jaw trembling. So I took his knife and made him stop. I ran before they found his body. The silence that followed was deep, broken only by the steady breathing of the boy above. Ethan stepped closer, his boots whispering against the straw. You were protecting yourself, he said finally. Her voice cracked. They won't care. They'll only see what I am. Ethan's hand came to rest lightly against her arm, not pulling her, not stopping her, just grounding her. Then they're blind, he said softly. You did what you had to. Don't carry shame that doesn't belong to you. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, all her defenses fell away. There it was, the raw, trembling truth beneath her strength. Tears welled but didn't fall. I can't stay, she whispered. He nodded slowly, though every part of him wanted to say otherwise. Then promise me one thing, he said. Don't run from the part of you that still wants peace. Her hand brushed his, a brief, electric contact that said everything words couldn't. The sun climbed higher, lighting the space between them, warm and impossible to hold. And in that fragile morning silence, Ethan realized he wasn't losing a stranger. He was watching someone finally step back into her own life, and it broke something beautiful inside him to let her go. The morning light stretched long and soft over the plains, touching the world with a kind of gentle finality. The air smelled of dew and horses and the faint smoke from the breakfast fire that had gone cold. Ethan stood by the corral, tightening the saddle straps on his mare, though his hands worked slower than usual, as if his mind wasn't ready to do what his body knew must be done. The widow stood a few paces away, her blanket folded neatly, her few belongings tied in a small bundle. She wore the same clothes she'd arrived in, though now they were clean, mended in quiet moments by the fire. The days she'd spent here had changed her, not in appearance, but in the way she held herself. Her shoulders weren't bent anymore. There was strength again in the way she stood, quiet but sure. Ethan glanced at her as the wind lifted her hair from her face. The sunlight caught it, strands of black against the pale morning. He wished, for a foolish heartbeat, that she'd ask to stay. But the look in her eyes told him she already belonged to the road ahead. His son came running out of the house, barefoot and smiling, carrying a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. For her, the boy said proudly. So she won't be hungry. The widow knelt down, her expression softening as she accepted it. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick. You're very brave, you know that. The boy beamed, then, and you will. For a long moment, they stood there, two people bound by a kind of closeness that didn't need words. Then she stepped forward, close enough that he could feel her breath. Slowly, she reached up and pressed her forehead against his, her hand. When his son came to stand beside him, tugging at his sleeve, Ethan didn't speak. He only rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, eyes still fixed on the open plains. Somewhere out there, she was free, and though she carried his heart with her, he felt no regret. Because sometimes, love isn't about holding on. It's about being the place someone can finally leave from, unafraid.